So now let's try to scale back one of those larger approaches I asked. If we're saying CPT is this idea of cognitive behavioral therapy on steroids, let's go to an even lesser degree and focus on a specific coping skill we can apply right now. CPT is going to get at challenging specific thoughts. And, there's people I've worked with where it's 10, 15, 30, 50 thoughts. We don't know the quantity, but that's a large undertaking. And we can scale it back to trying to focus on what our thinking is in these moments with another DBT skill. And this is one that touches on looking at the accuracy of our thoughts. It's called checking the facts. And it's very straightforward. And we're really trying to see how our emotional experience is influenced by our thoughts. This, it tends to be pretty self-explanatory, but what we're asking here is to identify if there is more of an interpretation happening in some moments rather than seeing things objectively. First, we're asking you to ask, what is this emotion that I'm feeling? And with this, we tend to get pretty lazy as people. I'll speak, personally, there's times where that word irritable comes out, and irritable really doesn't capture the emotion in that moment. It might be frustrated, it might be embarrassed. And if we're using that word irritable and it really doesn't tap into the accurate emotion, we're not only doing others a disservice, we're really doing ourselves a disservice. The idea of communicating we're irritable, it's going to lead people to really leave us, to pull away. If we're feeling embarrassed or hurt or lonely and we're communicating irritability, the last thing we need is people to leave us. We need them to come in much more closely in those moments. So as we're asking about or mentioning the importance of trying to identify that emotion, we really want to increase this emotional vocabulary. There's something we can use, tons of tools like the feelings wheel, which grabs all this nuance of our emotions and really define, what the specific emotion is, and also see if there are multiple emotions. The next step gets into the what, and these are where the facts come from. We're asking you, what are the facts? What do you know? What is leading to this belief? And I'm asking for something largely objective here. What's observable? What are you interpreting in terms of your senses? What did you see in that moment in terms of nonverbals? What did you hear? And I'm not asking for any conjecture. We want you to listen to the actual words you heard and really identify, what did I take in that moment? Am I putting my own opinion on the words I heard? Am I adding this interpretation that is coming from my lens, coming from my perspective? We want to get exactly what was said to really get that objective information in this moment. Here we want to start pushing back against any judgments, any maybe catastrophic thinking, any extreme, any all or nothing thinking, any exaggerated thinking that may be happening. And you can hear this particular nature to what we're asking you to do. We're asking you to look at this moment, identify what the facts are, and identify if we're placing some particular spin, some particular understanding in terms of our lens in this moment. That's what we're really trying to push back on here. Then we want to start viewing this situation as whether it's threatening. Are we interpreting a threat here? Are we seeing some type of threat that may not be there? As we're checking the facts, we're asking you, what is going on right here? And it can be helpful to jump into someone else's mind or imagine how someone else might see this. We can think about people in our lives that may be very pragmatic, very logical, very rational, and a person or two tends to come to mind. In these moments, we're asking, how would this person interpret that? How would they see this moment? What would their understanding be? That's how we want to check that and see if that interpretation on our end may not be based in the observable, may not be based in the facts specifically. Finally, we're trying to see if we are viewing this moment as catastrophic, potentially. If we're seeing some catastrophe happening, we want to start to move into more of a success-oriented approach. We want to start to imagine What if this worst case scenario outcome did happen? How could I cope with it? How would I deal with it? What's the best case? What's the worst case? What's the most likely outcome? And then we want to start to imagine ourselves coping well in this moment, responding well. What would that look like for us? Finally, we want to move into this last step, and that is trying to identify that emotion and the facts we've come up with and asking ourselves, does my emotion fit those facts? This isn't to say that your emotion is invalid. It's not to say it's wrong. It's a real emotion. You're feeling it. That's legitimate. But we want to assess, does it fit maybe my interpretation? Does it fit maybe this one small piece of the situation that I'm looking at or paying attention to, rather than the situation as a whole, or rather than the facts as a whole? We also want to look at the intensity. It's very common to feel hurt. If someone we care about tells us they don't want to go to lunch with us or they don't want to spend time with us. If our emotion is rage, that may not necessarily fit. That intensity may not be functional. And that's information for us. It's information to look back on the situation and try to assess our interpretation. Try to assess if it was accurate, if it was functional. That's the value of really looking at the facts in that situation. And that also prepares us for future situations. If we know that we typically respond in this way that, maybe is a little more intense than we desire, we can start to retrace those steps and try to understand, where is that coming from? I may be having some of these symptoms we've talked about in terms of my trauma affecting my relationships. This is coming up in these other areas. I hear things through this particular lens based on what I've experienced in the past. To reiterate a point that was mentioned before, as far as awareness, at this point, if so much of what has been talked about resonates with you, if it evokes some unpleasant emotions, if it leads to some feelings of distress, that's something that is actually a positive. It's telling us that you may have found a focus for you. You may have found really that area for treatment for you. And that's the best place for us to make progress in therapy. At times we want to make sure that we're not just treating the symptoms, we're really treating the disorder, we're really treating the root cause. Take this time, and if you are feeling some intense emotions, work at understanding them, whether it's journaling and taking them down, or taking a moment to process them, or seeking support in someone in your life, bouncing that idea off of them that maybe this is the right approach for you. This is a great thing at this point if this is hitting home.